On November 9, 1995, Sonny Pak returned home from work to find his young daughter brutally murdered. He immediately called the police, and when detectives arrived at the crime scene, they quickly noticed signs of torture on the victim's body. However, despite all the efforts by the police, no evidence was found in the house, and the case was soon suspended for many years. It was only 5 years later, thanks to a new witness, that the police were finally able to identify the culprits. The life of 18-year-old Linda Pak in the city of Irvine, California, was full of bright colors and opportunities. She had recently enrolled at Irvine College in Whaley, but was already considering transferring to Fullerton, where her older sister studied. She was drawn to that college for its spacious campus, large student body, and wide range of opportunities, including unlimited internet access. In 1995, the internet was just starting to gain popularity, and many people were wary of it because they didn't know how to protect their personal data. I've said it many times before. Many crimes begin when criminals gain access to poorly protected information about their victims. Linda's parents emigrated from Korea in the 1970s. Her father, Sonny Pak, was a very hard-working man who wanted to provide a better future for his family. After several years of hard work, he was able to move his family to the middle-class town of Irvine, California. Both daughters enrolled in college, and their life in America began to thrive. Linda enjoyed being treated as an adult. At just 18 years old, she was already responsible, caring, and devoted. November 9th started like any other day for the Pak family, but ended in tragedy. Each family member had a different morning routine depending on their schedule. Sonny, the head of the household, woke up very early, drank a glass of cold water, and went to work at his upholstery fabric store. At that time, his wife worked at the post office. Her shift started in the evening. The next to leave was their older daughter, Jenny. She later said that she overslept that day and didn't even have time for breakfast. However, she still remembers that when she left, her mother and sister were both still in their pajamas. Shortly after Jenny left, Linda headed to her community college classes. She was studying hard, hoping to improve her grades and transfer to the university where her sister studied, to earn a bachelor's degree. That day, Linda returned home earlier than the rest of the family. Her parents were at work, and her sister was still in class. As usual, she immediately began preparing dinner for everyone. Around 4:30 p.m., she called her father and asked when he would be home. He told her he would be back as usual by 5:30. But at 6 o'clock, Sonny realized he wouldn't make it in time for dinner. He called Linda again, but she didn't answer. So he left her a message. "Linda, are you home? I'll be back from work at 7:30. Around 8 p.m., Sonny finally returned home. Usually, Linda would greet him at the door, but this time she didn't, which surprised him. He unlocked the door with his key and walked in. In the living room, he saw his daughter. At first he thought she had collapsed. But when he looked closer, he was horrified. Linda was lying on the living room floor, tied up in a pool of blood. Her hands and feet were bound behind her back, her throat had been slashed, and the carpet was soaked in blood. An electrical cord was also wrapped around her neck. Sonny immediately dialed emergency services. 911, what is your emergency? The Irvine Police Department received a call from Sonny Pak, Linda's father. He was in shock. He had come home to find his daughter dead. A patrol officer was the first to arrive at the scene, followed shortly by detectives. Officers entered the house and immediately found Linda's body on the floor near the living room entrance. Her hands and feet were tightly bound with rope, and an electrical cord was wrapped tightly around her neck. Detectives also noticed a deep cut on her neck and several others on her body, all clear signs of a brutal homicide. They knew they had to find the killer, but didn't yet know how. According to the detectives who worked on the case, this was a particularly extreme example of excessive violence. Around 10 p.m., Jenny returned home from school, completely unprepared for the horror awaiting her. Even 2 houses away, I saw police cars and yellow tape. And then I saw my father. He told me what had happened. As the Pak family tried to make sense of the tragedy, the police began searching the home. One officer asked Jenny to walk through the house with him and tell him if anything was missing. She agreed immediately. At first glance, the living room appeared untouched. But then Jenny noticed something strange. Her mother's jewelry box was open and empty. A brown jacket, one in which her father kept cash, was on the floor, and both the cash and jewelry were missing. This pointed toward a robbery. However, the detectives weren't entirely convinced by that theory. They couldn't understand, if robbery was the motive, why kill Linda? They thoroughly examined the house, searching for any clues. The locks and windows were undamaged, suggesting the killer had entered without forced entry. Perhaps Linda had opened the door herself, unaware of their intentions, or she may have known them and let them in willingly. What Sonny found in the living room was horrifying. Linda was lying in a pool of blood, her limbs bound. Neither he nor the neighbors in this quiet suburb could imagine who could commit such a cruel and vile murder. Something like that wasn't supposed to happen in a loving home. No fingerprints were found at the scene, but forensic experts collected DNA samples for analysis. At the time, detectives didn't have much experience working with DNA evidence. They gathered the cords used to tie Linda and sent them to the lab, hoping to extract DNA. Since perpetrators often tie knots with bare hands, there was a good chance of finding a trace. While waiting for results, detectives turned to Linda's family for information. The killer could have been a friend or someone Linda knew. They tried to learn everything they could. Perhaps someone had a grudge against her father or sister. But the family couldn't help. They had no idea who would do such a thing or why. It was hard for the Pak family to understand how this could happen. They were a typical Korean immigrant family who had worked hard for their children's future. Now they were confused and devastated. After long conversations, the detectives ruled out any involvement from Linda's relatives. She was a quiet girl from a good family, not someone who got into conflicts. That meant the killer had to be someone from outside her close circle. The brutal murder shocked the quiet town of Irvine. The crime raised more questions than answers. Residents couldn't believe such a thing could happen in their city, which always had one of the lowest murder rates in the country. Conversations with neighbors confirmed that the situation had left everyone shaken. When I visited the Paks, Linda always looked through the peephole or window. Or she asked, "Who is it?" She would never open the door without knowing who was there. The whole family was cautious. Irvine usually saw more common crimes: home burglaries, car break-ins, bike thefts, even vandalism. But brutal murders were extremely rare. The police worked tirelessly, trying to find at least one solid lead by carefully analyzing everything that happened on the last day of Linda's life. That day began as usual for the Pak family. Linda attended her classes at Irvine Valley College and returned home. At school, she was seen as a sweet and quiet girl, but few people really knew her. She was very reserved. Detectives were looking for people who had been close to Linda and might be able to share something useful about her social circle. They turned once again to her family, hoping to find out whether she had any strange or unpleasant acquaintances who could be considered suspects. The family mentioned only one name, Monica. Linda had recently made a new friend at college whom her relatives didn't know. Monica was completely different from the people Linda usually spent time with. At 18, Monica already had a child. Despite that, Linda started spending more and more time with her. The police began looking into Linda's new friend, and suspicions grew stronger. Monica associated with shady men, and the father of her child had a criminal past. He was known to have ties to the criminal world and could potentially be involved in Linda Pack's murder. The victim's family was convinced that Monica had something to do with it. A strange coincidence. This girl appeared in Linda's life, and then Linda died. Detectives went to question Monica and the father of her child. Both of them claimed they had nothing to do with Linda's murder. Monica had an alibi. At the time of the murder, she and her boyfriend were far from the crime scene. The police cleared them of suspicion. 2 days after Linda's death, the medical examiner announced the autopsy results. The cause of death was strangulation. A cord was found around her neck. There were also several stab wounds, but they were not fatal. According to the experts, Linda had been tortured before she died. The wounds were shallow, indicating that they were not meant to kill but to intimidate. Investigators suspected that the attackers were trying to force Linda to reveal something, possibly where valuables or money were kept. Linda's final hours were filled with suffering. She didn't know if she would survive and spent a long time in fear and pain. It's horrifying to think that people can do such things to others. The autopsy only confirmed the cause of death, but it did not help the detectives move any closer to identifying the killer. However, the lab did manage to extract a DNA sample. It belonged to an unknown man. The killer had left it behind while tying her up. In 1995, there was no unified DNA database, so there was nothing to compare the sample to. The lack of results was discouraging for the Pack family, but sometimes waiting is the only option. A week after the murder, a lead finally emerged. The police received an anonymous phone call. The caller named 4 high school students from the nearby town of Tustin. According to the caller, on the day of the murder, the teens were seen driving past the Pack home. Tustin is close to Irvine, where Sonny Pack owned a second upholstery store. Detectives found the students at school. 3 of them admitted they had been in Irvine near the Pack house on the night of the murder. But the 4th gave a completely different account. He claimed they were at a shopping center downtown. His story differed significantly from the others, raising red flags. During questioning, it became clear not everyone was telling the truth. But who was lying and why? 3 boys said they were near Linda's house, while the 4th claimed they were elsewhere. Detectives pressured him, and he finally confessed to lying. "What were you doing on November 9th? "I think I was hanging out with my friends that day." Then his father arrived at the school. Realizing the seriousness of the situation, and after his father urged him to tell the truth, the boy finally admitted he had lied out of fear. He was afraid he'd be accused of murder. "Were you there alone or with friends?" "There were 3 of us, no 4. He had tried to invent an alibi just in case. In the end, his story matched the others. The detectives checked their alibis and confirmed that they couldn't have committed the murder. One of the teens had been visiting a relative who lived near the Pack home. The boys were cleared of suspicion, and the investigation hit another dead end. Police always fear that they'll run out of leads and the victim's family will never find peace. In Irvine, the case was treated very seriously, not only because murders were rare in the quiet town, but because this one was exceptionally brutal. The killer needed to be found and punished. But months passed, and the investigation stalled. Detectives interviewed hundreds of people but found no viable suspects. With no one to focus on, investigators began to suspect the involvement of a criminal gang. At the time, Asian gangs in the area were known for robbing homes, especially targeting immigrant families who kept valuables and cash at home rather than in banks. If the gang learned that someone had money in the house, they would break in. The Packs had a nice home in Irvine and owned cars. That alone could be a motive for robbery. Looking into gang activity connected to Linda Pack's case led detectives to a group based in neighboring Westminster. They sought help from the local police, who knew the gang members' names, street aliases, and hangout spots. This information proved useful, but none of the gang members turned out to be suspects. 6 months had passed since Linda's death, but her family had not lost hope. Every week, they contacted police to check on the case. They even offered a $20,000 reward for any information about the killer. They were determined to learn the truth. "I miss Linda so much. I'm so sorry. I apologize to the whole family. What kind of husband and father am I if I couldn't protect her?" Each day the pain grew stronger. Her father suffered visibly every day. He cried, screamed, hit his head against the walls, and even contemplated suicide. While Linda's family tried to cope with unbearable grief, detectives kept searching for clues. But a year passed, and the case remained unsolved. With no new evidence, the investigation seemed hopeless. Detectives began to think they might never catch Linda's killer. That's when they decided to take a step back and review everything again, in the hopes of finding something they had missed the first time. However, nothing came of it. The investigation stalled. But nearly 5 years later, the case was revived thanks to an unexpected witness. Detectives learned that one of the inmates in a state prison had knowledge of Linda Pack's murder, and even named 2 people. According to him, Ronald Tran and Noel Plata had confessed to the crime during a conversation he had overheard. He was willing to repeat the conversation in court. Detectives discovered that Ronald and Noel were members of a gang with extensive criminal histories. At the time of the call, Noel Plata was serving time for a murder committed after Linda's death, while Ronald had already been released early from prison after serving a sentence for theft. These men had a criminal background and were clearly capable of such a crime. When investigators looked into Ronald's life, they found a surprising connection to Linda Pack. They had known each other in college. They weren't friends, and Linda didn't associate with people from such a background. It turned out Ronald was a member of a Vietnamese street gang called Vietnam Forever. In the mid-1990s, this gang was notorious for thefts, robberies, and murders. Many of its members lived in Little Saigon, a Vietnamese neighborhood about 25 kilometers from the Pack family home. The new witness, brought in by the police, was also a high-ranking member of the gang. Although he had committed crimes, he wasn't involved in Linda's murder. He was facing many charges, and in exchange for a reduced sentence, he agreed to share information. He told investigators he knew something about a murder in Irvine. However, his words alone weren't enough to bring charges. What was needed was a confession. According to the informant, Noel Plata had talked openly about the crime. So, the police brought in Ronald and transported Noel from Orange County Prison. They were led in separately, while the informant was wired. The informant reported that the original plan had been to rob the house, but then they decided to strangle Linda. Detectives wanted to see if Ronald Tran and Noel Plata would discuss the murder in front of the informant. So, was it worth it? No way. Think they brought all 3 of us here, one at a time. You think they brought you in because of the murder? I don't know, man. All I can say is, if Noel talks, I'm done for. Who else knows? You think we need to worry about them? Just his girl. He grabbed the necklace and knocked over the cactus. On their own, these words might have meant nothing, but detectives knew there was a table with cacti next to Linda Pack's body. One had apparently fallen over when she was tied up. This detail linked Ronald Tran and Noel Plata directly to the murder. Soon detectives received new crucial evidence. In 1995, forensic experts had collected a DNA sample from the cords used to bind Linda. Noel Plata's DNA was already in the database, and they collected Ronald's for comparison. They hoped for a match to confirm they were on the right track. Noel Plata's DNA did not match the sample from the cords, but Ronald Tran's did. His genetic trace was found on the cords recovered at the crime scene. There was only one explanation. Detectives compiled all the evidence they had: the DNA result, the recorded conversation, and the informant's testimony. Now they were ready to press charges. In 2001, both men were officially charged with Linda Pack's murder. Detectives called Mr. Pack to inform him they had found his daughter's killers. "We had almost given up," he said. "And 5 years later, we learned that her killers were gang members. It was devastating. Linda didn't associate with people like those from the Vietnamese street gang. That's why the investigation took so long. No one could understand why they would do this to her." As the trial approached, an answer to that very question emerged. Why had this young woman become the target of street criminals? Ronald Tran and Noel Plata mentioned the name of a girl, Joan. Few people are willing to testify against gang members, so detectives subpoenaed her to find out what she knew about the murder. In exchange for her testimony, she demanded immunity from prosecution. Joanne, the same one Ronald mentioned during the informant's recording, was subpoenaed by the prosecution. "Haven't seen her since '96, Ronald said. "Still haven't forgotten." "No, but she left. I thought it was serious between us." "Who left who?" "I went to prison. She didn't wait." "What was her name?" "Joanne." Ronald's ex-girlfriend likely had crucial information since she was connected to the murder. But instead of confessing outright, Joanne made a deal. She showed no remorse and had no intention of sharing her feelings. Her priority was her own well-being, and she didn't show any guilt. Once granted immunity, Joanne revealed a shocking truth. Detectives had already learned that she had dated Ronald, but it turned out she was also friends with Linda Pack. Joanne was the younger sister of one of Linda's friends, Jenny, and had even visited the Pack family home several times. She knew Mr. Pack earned good money, that they had 2 cars, and that cash was usually kept in the house, though not in large amounts. Joanne admitted she was the one who suggested robbing the Pack home. They wanted to find something valuable to sell. She even lent her car to Ronald and Noel and directed them to Linda's house, knowing her family usually kept cash at home. "I didn't know she was dating a criminal," someone close to Linda said. "I still can't wrap my head around this. Such betrayal. I don't understand how someone can do that to a friend, much less subject them to that kind of nightmare. You don't do that to people you care about." Joanne's testimony allowed detectives to reconstruct what happened to Linda Pack on November 9th. Ronald knocked on the door. Linda opened it because she recognized him. But as soon as she did, Ronald and Noel forced their way in. They were strong and quickly overpowered her. They began interrogating her, demanding to know where the valuables were. She told them what she knew, but detectives believe they thought she was hiding something more. They began to torture her, hoping she would reveal the location of other valuables. When they realized she had no more information, they strangled her. They couldn't leave a witness alive. In October 2007, 12 years after Linda Pack's murder, Ronald Tran and Noel Plata stood trial. The way Linda had been treated, the torture and the murder, was inhumane. There was no other word for it. After weeks of trial, the court found both Ronald and Noel guilty. They were convicted of murder and aggravated assault. In front of Linda's grieving family, the men were found guilty on all counts. The verdict brought some comfort to the Pack family, but Linda could never be brought back. When deciding whether to seek the death penalty, prosecutors reviewed the men's prior criminal records and the horrific details of Linda Pack's murder. They concluded they had sufficient grounds to pursue capital punishment. Ultimately, Ronald Tran and Noel Plata were sentenced to death and sent to San Quentin's death row. Unfortunately, no sentence, no matter how severe, can ever heal the pain of Linda's family or bring her back. Friends, what do you think about this story? Share your thoughts in the comments, And don't forget to subscribe to my YouTube channel.